Hi everybody. First off, I really hope this thing doesn't pick up my heartbeat. Just scream if it does, then I'll try to breathe in and breathe out and just relax a little. But for now, let's start off. I'm Jossi Wolf. I'm a freelance Android developer from Hamburg in Germany, where we have some awesome pastries, and in general, it's the best city in the world. So you should definitely visit. And I'm going to tell you about motion layout and animations and transitions, why motion layout is actually awesome, how the motion layout team has been annoying me in the past. Well, yeah, that's going to be the next 35 minutes. You can find me on Twitter at Jossi Wolf. Feel free to tweet about the talk, tweet some pictures, and so on. Let's start off. So, Android animation APIs are a kind of delicate topic sometimes. You might have a designer who's coming up to you and they're like, hey, can you do that? And you're like, yeah, I can try. You sit down. You're like, okay, yeah, that works. You pick out some fancy animation APIs like here an animated vector drawable, you use shapeshifter, you might want to use ConstraintLayout with constraint sets, animate that. You go fancy, you have some shared element transitions, you have physics-based animations because you're really awesome, and you have view property animations. And, well, you write something awesome, but then you get this. And I mean, that's like for one animation, right? So, it's fine, it works, it looks good, your designer's happy, your product manager's happy, and you're just happy to go to sleep. But then, a few months later, your designer's like, yeah, I want to kind of tweak that. Can we change the duration? Sure. Can we change the interpolator? Yeah, we can do that. And now, can we make it look like on iOS? And then you're just going to be like, my sister's dog. You're like, what? And if you're a really, really poor soul, I'm so sorry for you. If you have to support below Android Lollipop, below API 21, you're going to have some problems because there are some Android animation APIs which will work, some don't. Then there are Samsung devices, and there's Huawei devices. Well, yeah, you know the game. So the good news is why motion layout is awesome in the first place and why you should take a look at. It supports MinSDK 80. And you can do really, really awesome stuff with it. There is someone on Twitter, Mike Skimmel, and he's done some really cool animations with it. He sat down and explored motion layout each Sunday and built this crazy thing. And there's awesome other animations by Nick Butcher and lots more. So it really shows what you can do. We're going to start off with the basics in this talk. So you have the right tools to actually get started using motion layout and build stuff like this. So first off, motion layout has this kind of weird release history. So it was released on June last year, actually on the day that I gave a talk about animations at DroidCon Berlin. Yeah, so recently the ConstraintLayout team released a new version on the day that Mike Skimmel gave a talk at DroidCon Italy, releasing new alpha. So this is the timeline we have. June 2018, last year, was announced at I/O, and then first alpha was out in June. In between, we had some alphas, and I have some kind of reliable sources telling me that alpha 5 is to be released right now, right now. So we might want to switch to some live coding later. Let's see. But it's going to be out real soon is the point. So the lead developer of ConstraintLayout is Nicholas Ward. Bottom line is he's evil because he's kind of lining up the releases with our talks. But yeah, in general, motion layout is awesome if you don't give talks about it. Motion layout is awesome because First off, it's based on constraint layout. I mean, who doesn't like constraint layout? You have constraints. Well, I mean, you get all the nice stuff from constraint layout. You get positioning views through constraints. You get constraint sets and basic animations that are within constraint layout, and so much more stuff. So everything that will come to constraint layout will also be added to motion layout automatically because it just inherits from constraint layout. So that's all good news. You're not going to be stuck with frame layout or linear layout or something for the next 10 years. So getting started, let's look at the structure first. With MotionLayout, there are two really crucial components. The motion layout itself, obviously, and the motion scene. Let me just restart my timer. So, motion layout, you define it in your layout, and it contains all the views that you want to animate. Very important thing to note at the beginning is motion layout can only animate its direct children. So, since constraint layout doesn't actually really favor deeply nested layouts, you should be fine. There might be some use cases where you have to nest motion layouts itself, but we're going to get to that in a bit. The other crucial component is the motion scene. Motion scene basically contains all the information on how your animations and transitions should look like, how they should be triggered, and so on. So first off, the motion scene contains the constraint set. The constraint set is a number of constraints which tell the motion layout how the views are positioned, some of the attributes. You might want to set their color through the constraint. You can set the size, rotation, really whatever. So in code, it looks like this. It's a constraint set. You give it an ID with a, let's say it's constraint set start, and inside we'll add a constraint for a view. Our view has the ID animated view. And now we can go ahead and define some properties of this view. Like you want to say, okay, it's 64 dp times 64 dp. We have some margin, and it's constrained at its parent. So what you might notice is there's the motion namespace, and basically it's just that's different to constraint layout. You can really go ahead, take your existing constraint layout layouts, and just copy and paste it to those constraint sets, and it will all work. You can also take just existing layouts and reference them. And the other thing that the motion scene contains, obviously, is the transition. The transition defines or tells motion layout how the transition should look. So you have like an on-click or an on-swipe, which says, right, I want to trigger the animation through clicking or swiping. And then there's keyframes, which can kind of manipulate the animation between starting and ending state. So now we have the structure. Let's look at some more code. Let's say we have our activity home XML, or if you're a fragments fan, we have fragment home.xml. Just imagine it's fragment home XML there. And we define the motion layout just like a normal view. And you will notice there's there's the ID, layout width, and layout height. And there's one new tag which we don't see on other views, which is the layout description. So layout description is what references the motion scene, which tells motion layout how everything should look like, how it should work. This motion scene, it's just another XML file. You can define it in the XML folder. And it could look like this if you start from ground up. So as a root tag, we have the motion scene, and it contains a transition tag. And this transition tag has three important things: duration, constraint set start, and constraint set end. So the constraint set start tells motion layout, okay, this is what you're going to start with, and the end is what you're going to animate to. And go ahead and figure out what's in between, and we can change some stuff and influence that. You can As you see, we're just referencing some layouts here for the constraint sets, which contain constraint layouts. If you are more comfortable with inlining those constraints, that's also totally possible and totally fine. Kind of depends on your use case. It might be kind of hard to synchronize two different layout files. If you have more complex layouts, there's also some stuff coming in the newest alpha version where you can have kind of inheritance for constraint sets, which is going to make this just a bit better. More on that later. And now we have the transition triggers, because obviously we have our transition and we want to trigger it. So we can go through for either unclick, or we can go for swiping if we want to be fancy. Obviously we want to be fancy. So we can add inside the transition tag a onSwipe element. And we can give it like a touch anchor side, and we can give it a drag direction, so it listens to drags to the right side. There's some more things coming in the newest version, which is called touch region. So right now those transition triggers, they listen for touches on the whole motion layout, which might not be that optimal if you want to have different transition triggers for different views. So in the upcoming version of MotionLayout, you will be actually able to define for which view this trigger is for. Right, okay, that's like the basics of MotionLayout. And now we're gonna like hit build. This is so I can grab some water. If you ever need to spend some time, if your talk is not long enough, it's the way to go. But my talk is long enough, I hope. So if it has actually compiled, this is what we will get. And you know performance is good because I recorded this in the emulator. So we have our start thingy, and we can swipe it to the end. We can swipe it back. So that's all nice. You might want to do some more complex, fancy stuff, and you're going to be like, what is going on? So debugging transitions. Obviously, there's something which is called debug modes in MotionLayout. So there's two of them. Debug show path, which is what we just saw. So you have like this path which shows from the start state to the end state. And you have the progress as well, if you want, which shows some frames per seconds information. It shows from which state to which state it goes and the progress of it. It doesn't show the path combined yet. Let's see. Yeah. I added some cute dog pictures just in between and some cute rabbit pictures. So just to make it a bit more light. Before we jump into keyframes, a scary thing. Well, actually not that scary. You know, keyframes are kind of the way we have our starting state, we have our ending state, and we might want to introduce something that's not a real state, but is kind of there, like a ghost state, I don't know, in between, where it's just maybe manipulates the position or the size or whatever. So you maybe have like this crazy designer, and they're like, can you do this? Swallow? Yes, you can. We're going to start off simple with this kind of arc thingy for now, and look at some common attributes of keyframes. In MotionLayout, there are different types of keyframes, 3.5, let's say, maybe 4, and they all share some common attributes. So this right here, this blue dot that you see in between, that is the frame position at which our keyframe is at. So we tell MotionLayout, at this frame position, do something. Really simple. I have the same slide twice. Right, so just at this point. Then there's also the motion target. So you tell MotionLayout, okay, for this keyframe, I want to target this view. This view should be affected. So in our case, like our motion target is just our view. And there's also some, those two attributes you will always need. There's also two more kind of not that important attributes, but if you're going to go more complex, you might want to use that. So is motion or curve fit, which kind of defines how the values are interpolated, and it's blind by default. That's totally fine. You can also change it to linear. It won't be as smooth, so if you're looking to do something which is more abrupt, you might want to go for linear. But spline is default and should be working fine. And then there's also transition easing, because you might want to just follow the material design guidelines or something, like in this video. So easing can be really helpful to smoothen out your animations, to make them behave more like in the real world. And by default, this is linear and constraint in MotionLayout. But you can also set it to like cubic values to make it smoother. There is some good documentation on that in one of the blog posts I will link later. And then there is also keyPosition type. This is a thing I always struggle to kind of explain. But you have coordinate systems in MotionLayout. MotionLayout uses some coordinate systems to figure out, like if you manipulate the position of a view with one of those keyframes, like we just had in one of the earlier examples, then it has to use some kind of coordinate system to figure out, all right, where should I put the element, and like if I say y should be 0.25%, MotionLayout somehow has to figure out where is 0.25%. So there's three ways which we can tell MotionLayout which kind of coordinate system to use. One is parent relative. So if you have the MotionLayout container, it'll just take the parent container, and it's all relative to the size of the parent. So 0 is like the bottom left of the parent, and 1.0 in the corner there, top left, is the top left of the parent, which is kind of straightforward and useful if you just want to animate something related to the parent size. As the name says, parent relative. There is also delta relative. So for those of you who didn't actually pay attention in school, like me, delta means like the difference between start and end. I did physics in high school and I had to look it up again. So delta is the difference between starting and end. So your kind of starting state will be your 0.0 and your ending state will be your 0.1 up there. This is kind of useful if you want to do just something related, relative to the starting state or to the ending state, like, I don't know, half of the way or something. But you're not going to use it as much, I think. Path relative is the last one that you can have. And as the name says, it's really just relative to the path. So if you have this path which is going from the starting state to the ending state, just like linear, and you'd like to manipulate the y position, then it'll just go on this path. And that's probably makes the most sense for like animations and transitions where you're changing size or changing the position of view. So those are like the common attributes that that all kind of keyframes share. But there are three types, well, 3.5 I said earlier, types of keyframes. I should have more very good running slides. First one is keyPosition, which is influencing a position of the view. Second one is KeyAttribute, which, well, as the name says, influences some attributes of the view, like you might want to change the rotation or background color or something. And then there's also KeyCycle, which I think is by far the most exciting thing about MotionLayout, because it's super complex and kind of allows you to do really complex animations and define them in a non-repetitive way. Let's start off with KeyPosition, because it's kind of straightforward to understand. So we have, back to basics, our motion scene, and we have a transition. And we defined this on swipe thingy, we defined some constraint sets, and now we want to add some keyframes. Yeah. Number of keyframes, obviously, in that naming scheme goes into a keyframe set. And this can contain multiple types of keyframes. So you might want to go crazy and have a KeyPosition and a KeyAttribute and a KeyCycle and a KeyTimeCycle, and who knows what's coming in one keyframe set. That all works. One thing to remember is you can't have multiple keyframe types at the same frame position. But apart from that, it's all fine. So let's go ahead and add a KeyPosition. Well, as simple, and add some attributes that we need. Those are, yeah, common ones, like the motion target. So we tell it, hey, we want to influence this button at that point, with the point being frame position 50. So again, like we had earlier, just in the middle of the frames. And in this case, we define a position. So we want our element to move. So we say %y is 1.25%. And it looks like this, roughly. So imagine you would have actually a straight line going from the starting state to the ending state. And now you say the y position just goes up, is 1.25% higher. And then it moves in this kind of arc motion. And lastly, obviously we set the KeyPosition type. We set it to path relative because we wanted to move along the path. This is what the whole KeyPosition keyframe set looks like. KeyAttribute is next. So KeyAttribute, as I said earlier, it's to define attributes at a certain keyframe. Again, we have our transition constraint sets, and we have a keyframe set, which contains everything. And in there, let's go ahead and add a KeyAttribute. So there's some things going on here. We'd say Android scale x and scale y should be 2, so multiplied by 2. We set the rotation to -45. We set the frame position to 50, so it's again just in between, in the middle. And we say our motion target is the button. And if we run it now, it looks like this. So it moves, and this is taken from the official ConstraintLayout samples, where there's also something changing the color. So you can also interpolate colors and custom attributes with that. Yeah, so the almost last thing of keyframes is KeyCycle. And it's a thing which took me so long to understand, so I hope I'm gonna explain it kind of properly. If I don't, just scream and ping me on Twitter or run to me and hit me after the talk, I know. But one thing I really want to get in your minds before we dive into the whole KeyCycle thing again is MotionLayout interpolates values. Like this, a lot of the stuff that MotionLayout actually does is like taking start, taking the end, and figuring out what's in between. So we might want to animate the size of a view. So we have a size 0, which is size at frame 0, and we have a size 100, which is size at frame 100. We say it's first 10, it goes to 50. And your designer comes along, and they're like, hey, can we like add something in between? And you're like, yeah, sure, works. You know, I know how to use KeyPosition and KeyAttribute now. And then your designer's like, so can we make it like bouncy? Can we? looking at the values for making something bouncy would look like this, right? So you have 0 and then 20, back to 0, back to 20, back to 0, so on. We have some like even steps here, so 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, which just makes it easier for now. So if we take those values and put it into a ugly PowerPoint diagram, it looks like this. And you can see it's this kind of waveform. Wow, that makes sense. So what you can see here from 0 to 20, that's what we will refer to as a cycle or a partial scene. So like, let's take this whole thing as the whole scene, and from 0 to 20 is a partial scene, and from 20 to 40 is again a partial scene. And yeah, MotionLayout has this awesome feature called KeyCycle, which allows you to actually just do that in a non-repetitive way, because if you would define a key position or a key attribute for each of those points, it would get quite repetitive. You couldn't read the code properly. So yeah, let's take a look at doing that. Again, we have our motion scene and a keyframe set, and inside the keyframe set, let's add a KeyCycle. Wow, that's a bunch of stuff. So let's walk through it. First off, we have the frame position. Yeah, you know, I always like frame position 50. It's a good example. Motion target is the button, and we're going to skip some for now. And we say with this KeyCycle, we want the translation Y to change, and we set it to 50. So let's add another KeyCycle before we look at what the three mysterious attributes there actually mean. Because one thing I want to explain first is we have two KeyCycles here now, and we have one which has the frame position 50, and that's the first KeyCycle. So the first cycle is going from 0 to 50, and then we have another one which is at the frame position 100. So we have a cycle from 0 to 50, and we have a cycle which is from 50 to 100. So if we run the code now, it looks like this. I was hoping people got excited, but no. I mean, like I was so excited when I did this. Yeah, but okay, that's fine. I think I'm the only animation enthusiast here. But anyways, so I really want to clarify this cycles thingy first, because I sat on that for like a week and I was like, why didn't I get that earlier? So we have one cycle from 0 to 50 and one from 50 to 100. And you can already see there's like some stuff going on. The cycle from 0 to 50 is just a bit different to the one from 50 to 100. So yeah, let's look at those mysterious three attributes which I grayed out before. We have the wave period, wave offset, and wave shape. So first of all, wave period. You know, we had those, I think PowerPoint just froze. You know, we had those partial scenes, cycles. So the wave period kind of influences the number of waves in a partial scene. So say this is our this is what we start with. I think it's 3 or 2, and if we just increase the number, it'll look like this. So you see there's just more waves, more repetition going on. We have the wave offset, which is the offset on the y-axis. It goes between 360 negative and 360 plus. So if you take 360 or something, it looks like this. So it's just shifted upwards. This can be really helpful if you are doing some detailed animations and want to smoothen some stuff out. And lastly, we have the wave shape, which we can define. It's the shape of the wave. So there are several wave shapes which MotionLayout supports, which are sine, square, triangle, sawtooth, reverse sawtooth, cosine, and bounce. First off, sine, you know, just like you know from physics class, you hated it. Then it's a standard thing you'll be going with. It'll be most useful. If you want to do some like abrupt animations, if you want to simulate Android emulator behavior, you might want to go for a square wave shape. Then there's also triangle. If you want to be like hectic, because it, you know, it starts kind of slowly and then goes shoot. Well, you know, it's kind of weird, but it can help if you want to have something with acceleration and deceleration. Then there's also sawtooth, and like to be honest, I don't really know where I would use that, but it's there. And so is reverse sawtooth. I'm sure there are some awesome use cases for it, which will come up in the future. If you're using this wave shape, tell me, ping me on Twitter. I'll retweet you. There's also cosine, because we have sine, cosine. And then there's bounce. Like if you want to do some fancy, I don't know, maybe your password is wrong, you've gone to the wrong country, you've used the wrong Android layout version, I don't know. Well, yeah, you can do bouncy stuff. That's cool in general. So now I talked about all of this without actually running the code, so let's do that. And it looks like this. I mean, that's pretty awesome. Right now, I just took an image of the sun. It's just an image view which animates along the path, and I changed the rotation. And then I went on Twitter, and I saw, hey, Nicola has the same, like the team lead of ConstraintLayout has the same example. Well, okay, great. But point is, you could do like awesome stuff. You could do a planetary system with MotionLayout. I mean, how cool is that? Then there's also KeyTimeCycle, which I just want to talk about really, really briefly. Basically, the definition is really, it's just the same as KeyCycle, just that you put like a time in the name in between. And if you run it, it looks like this. There's some stuff going on with the, you know, I mean, there's some bugs, yeah, granted. But, you know, the difference being that KeyTimeCycle is touch-driven. Like, I mean, what I'm doing there, I didn't record tabs, but it was so I touched the screen and moved my finger. So, and you can see that the rotation is still going on as I'm moving my finger, which is the difference to KeyCycle. So KeyCycle is like triggered once by the on-click or on-swipe, while KeyTimeCycle is you can manipulate it through touches and through seeking. Next slide is just a cute rabbit picture. We're going to move on to CycleEditor really quickly. So CycleEditor is a tool which was released like 3 months ago, and it basically allows you to take this KeyCycle stuff and visualize it. And it would look like this, like you have multiple panels and you have a preview which you can play. So it's all really awesome and useful, because this is not integrated into Android Studio yet. And there's supposed to be some tooling coming sometime after I/O, but we're still waiting on that. So if you're looking to do animations with KeyCycle or KeyTimeCycle, this is the tool to go. One thing which is really important, I just found out yesterday on the flight while preparing the talk, was the CycleEditor supports MotionLayout Alpha version 3. Current version is 4, or is it 5 already? So it's 4 to 5. But so don't go copy and pasting Alpha 4 code into the CycleEditor, because it won't work, and you'll be like, why doesn't it work? I have some slides to finish, and man, it's all getting close. Well, anyways, download the CycleEditor at github.com/google/sample/Android ConstraintLayout example/releases, or just like, yeah, Google CycleEditor, you can find it as well. So one thing I promised in my abstract was material motion. I want to talk about it really quick. Material motion has some awesome things like arc forces. Basically, material design documentation says, well, you shouldn't go like this, but you should go like, because it's more fancy. And it's like more in the real world. So you could do that before, right? No problem. You could do like create a transition XML file, obtain the Transitioninflater instance, inflate the transition, use the transition by like appending it to an animation and then starting the animation. Well, my point is with MotionLayout, it is this. Like you said, motion, path, motion, arc, and that's it. Like you get an arc motion, which is why it's awesome. Also, interpolation is something MotionLayout supports. All those interpolators, this long list from the documentation, you can set with the motion interpolator tag. What's next? Target matching. There's some awesome stuff coming in the next alpha version where you can define a constraint tag, it's called. So maybe you have like this group of items which belong to a group toolbar items. And if you when you define the key position, you can have the motion target actually as this group name. You can also use some crazy regex stuff and so on. So that's all going to be really useful to minimize the code that you have to write. Swipe regions, another thing I mentioned earlier, is like right now MotionLayout listens for touches on the whole layout. So next alpha version, you're going to be able to restrict the touches using touch region ID, so it's only going to listen for touches on this specific view. There's also derived constraints which are coming, so it's basically inheritance for constraint sets, which is again really awesome to make sure you don't repeat yourself. So yeah, it comes down to having this tag, which is derived constraints from. So you can like define a new state, which is based on the old state, and then another new state, and so on. So that's all pretty awesome. I'm running out of time, but I still have like this recap slide and a cute animal pic. So Alpha 5 is supposed to be the last alpha, which doesn't mean it is the last alpha, but there might be a good chance it is the last alpha. And it might come out today. It might have come out 5 minutes ago. Really, like, still it's an alpha, so there might be some bugs, but performance is good. Performance is actually really good. I've been constantly getting like 55 frames per second in the emulator. I mean, if the MotionLayout debug tool isn't lying. But you know, I get almost 60 frames in the emulator. That's really good. It's really stable. There is no like random crashes or something. We used MotionLayout last year at a client's project, and we never had any crashes which were caused by MotionLayout. So you can actually go ahead, try MotionLayout, use it. Yeah, almost last thing I have is this rabbit picture. It's one of my rabbits. She's really cute. Last slide is you can find me on Medium, where I blog like once a year. You can find me on Twitter, where I tweet too often. You can find me on GitHub, and you can find the slides for this in the next, 10 minutes on SpeakerDeck. So thanks for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to come to me after the talk, ping me on Twitter. Yeah, thanks.